Ambassador, we just went through a very contentious election. President Barack Obama starting his second term. Obviously, one of the foreign policy challenges will be managing this delicate relationship with China. How does he go about it?
Well, he has a head start, and a head start in the U.S.-China relationship, that of building bridges, establishing friendships, relationships, and a dialogue are all very important. And let's not forget that it takes a little bit of time to get all of that going, to get a little head of steam in such a very important relationship. So the last 4 years, I would argue, we've come around to the realization that the U.S.-China relationship is the most important relationship in the world. Now for the next 4 years, it's going to be, what do you do about it? And how do you reorganize the bureaucracies on both sides? Now that you have a re-elected president, and after the 18th Party Congress, you'll have a new group of leaders at the very top in Beijing. So now it's 4 years of what do we do about the reality that we're both on the world stage, the United States and China. Both presidents have said repeatedly over the last 4 years that the 中美关系就是这个世界上最重要的关系, that the U.S.-China relationship is the world's most important relationship. So now it's going to be a very careful calculation about how you make sense out of that reality, how you bring people together, how you prioritize the issues that really matter on the economic side, on the security side, on the people-to-people side, and then how do you begin building trust over the next 4 years? That's really what it's going to come down to.
So if the president were to pick up the phone and say, Ambassador, you were over there, you helped us, I got to ask you, how do I build the trust? How do I move us forward? What would the suggestions be?
I would say that it takes a priority on the part of the President of the United States. This is a relationship that increasingly will be driven by the heads of state. So it's a head of state to head of state kind of relationship. It can't be subordinates in the bureaucracy. It's too important. And moreover, you've got to give commands from the very top to make this relationship work. And so it will be about making it a priority, giving it the time necessary, not on the margins of the UN General Assembly or APEC or the G20, but a regularized, focused, bilateral relationship where every year there are 2 or 3 dedicated meetings, where it isn't a relationship driven by bureaucracy, but a relationship driven by the very top on both sides that promotes trust and better understanding, and therefore realistic priorities around which we can begin to build our future.
You were involved initially in this campaign, and then of course you've been on the sidelines watching it. There's been a lot of incendiary comments about China throughout. It seems like a lightning rod every 4 years. Let's beat up on China. It kind of can move the domestic audience. But what does it do in terms of that foreign policy exchange?
Well, first of all, in terms of domestic politics here, it's an easy applause line, but it's a mistake. It's always easier in domestic politics, and let's face it, as my friends in China tell me, 中国也有政治. China has politics too. And so we have a political season in China just as you have a political season here. And therefore, during that political season, it's always easier to say what you're going to do to China as opposed to what you're going to do with China. The kind of conversation that we need on both sides is what we're going to do about the relationship, not to the relationship, but about the relationship. What is America going to do with China as opposed to China? So that kind of talk and incendiary rhetoric during a campaign is a waste of time after the election is over. And I say that because it then takes longer to get both sides together, to build the trust that is needed, and to then make sense out of what was soundbite policy. And a whole year is wasted in a relationship that goes in very distinct cycles where a year can be very costly. So hitting the ground running is increasingly important in this relationship, which means during an election cycle, beginning to talk about what we're going to do together to build a durable, realistic relationship based upon our shared interests as opposed to interests that converge or diverge. We all know where we differ. We need to know where we come together. And we just haven't had that conversation.
You know, you talk about China in a thoughtful way, and yet during campaigns, even during the foreign policy debates, it seemed like the relationship is kind of glossed over. It's talked about in sound bites, as you pointed out. Was that a missed opportunity for both of the candidates?
Of course. A huge missed opportunity. But let's recognize reality here. In the primary phase of a campaign, you get the early organizers and activists who turn out who want to hear a different kind of conversation. And then as you get more toward the final end of a campaign, more toward November, where in America we have our elections, that's when you get a lot of the mainstream people who begin to tune in, and they want to hear reality. They want to hear what the future truly holds as opposed to just red meat, rhetoric and sound bites. So I would argue that if we begin these discussions at an earlier time, talking about reality, talking about a broad-based vision that is based on what the next generation is going to have to deal with respect to the U.S.-China relationship, we're better served. But there aren't a whole lot of people running for office these days who understand the U.S.-China relationship well enough to be able to put it in proper perspective in ways where they can actually present options or a realistic vision to the American people. And that's one of the challenges we face.
But there is this argument between perception and reality, and the perceptions on both sides are probably inaccurate. How does China see us? How do we see them? And what's the reality, because you've been there?
Well, China sees the United States as a power that might be waning somewhat, that in its fear of a changing world is trying to hem them in, engaged in regional diplomacy that would be built on holding China down, where that isn't the reality at all. The United States wants a strong and prosperous China. Why? Because we benefit and the whole world benefits from that. You have a stable region and a more prosperous region. We see China as a country that is stealing our jobs and therefore our economic future based upon unfair trade practices. So the reality is China has not lived up to all of its commitments under the WTO. I know, I've watched it very closely for years, but the fact of the matter is China has made some significant progress over the last generation. The first time I went to China with President Ronald Reagan in the early 80s, but I'd lived in Taiwan in the late 70s, so I'd seen China from the region. We didn't have any trade. We didn't have any economic interaction. There was nothing. Today, we're on the cusp of being the largest economic relationship the world has ever known. So something is working to get us there. The reality is, when you get to the heartland of China, when you get to the heartland of the United States, you talk to the soybean farmers in Iowa who are exporting more and more of their product to China. You talk to the alfalfa farmers in Utah who are exporting more and more to China. There's a reservoir of goodwill, and China is seen increasingly as an economic partner and as a market that will bring opportunity to the United States. So if we can hold on to that reality and to that, I think, emerging narrative, then I think we can begin to build a future around that would be good for both people.
You brought up farmers in Iowa, and some of them actually know the next leader of China.
That's right.
Xi Jinping.
That's right.
What difference does that make?
That's huge. Yeah, I used to argue as ambassador, both in the foreign ministry in Beijing and in our State Department here in Washington, that the key to a successful U.S.-China relationship in the future will be humanizing this large, complicated relationship that very few people understand. You have to bring it down to earth in ways that where people see an interest in supporting the relationship. Today, there aren't enough people in the United States who see a personal interest in a strong U.S.-China relationship. They fear it sometimes. It needs to be explained that they benefit by a strong U.S.-China relationship, but that's all done by humanizing it, which means we have to bring it to our local communities. So Xi Jinping going to Iowa is bringing it down to earth. Our mayors and our governors interacting more with mayors and governors from China. It brings it to the hometown, and you can begin to see the benefits of a strong U.S.-China relationship. So the future will be less Beijing and Washington and a whole lot more Iowa and Gansu, localizing the relationship.
This Pacific pivot that the defense secretary's talked about a lot, and you talked about perceptions. The sense from China, one would think, is that, geez, we're getting hemmed in, we're encircled. What do you see there, and how do you mitigate that if you're the U.S. to calm any fears there may be on the Chinese side?
Through dialogue. There has to be a very clear articulation of what our interests are in the region and what they have been for over 100 years. We've been a player in the Pacific since at least the end of the 1800s. I mean, going back to 1897, 1898, and we've been a player in the region ever since. And the region has benefited enormously by the presence of the Seventh Fleet, for example, by our strong security overlay, which has kept the sea lanes open for the free flow of trade and commerce. And China has been an enormous beneficiary of what we have provided in the region. And so this is part of our dialogue that we must have with China, and that is, where do we have shared interests? One of our enormous shared interests is economic prosperity, not only for both countries, but indeed for the region. And the only way you're going to be able to achieve that is by some sort of insurance policy, kind of a security overlay that allows for trade and investment to flourish. And we're a big part of that.
Let me talk to you about the other foreign policy issues that are on the president's plate. Syria, obviously, Iran. Where do you place them, and how does he approach those?
We need to clean up the Middle East. We need to fix it. It's broken, and we've spent over a decade engaged in conflict. And to my mind, we need more diplomacy and less militancy. We need to use our levers of power as a nation that speak to providing opportunity where there are pockets of despair. So why are people turning to radicalism and anti-Americanism? Because there aren't enough jobs and opportunity in parts of North Africa, the Middle East, and South Asia. We're very easy to blame as a country. So what do you do about it? You have to provide security first and foremost. Some countries are in flux, and they will be for a very long time, and I'm not sure there's much that we can do about that over the short term. Some of these transitions are going to have to play out like they did at the end of the Ottoman Empire in 1918, 1919. We didn't know for a very long time where the power centers were in the Middle East. And I think this is a once per century kind of transition. Call it whatever you want, the Arab Spring, the Jasmine Spring. It's a once per century transformation that is based on long-standing dictatorships, economic disparities, and lack of job opportunities in many places. And three, the ability to communicate instantaneously in real time about your gripes and grievances toward your government. And all three of these things have never existed simultaneously before, and they're here today. And it's driving change, and I think we do ourselves a disservice in our nation by jumping to conclusions. We don't need another Fallujah in Syria. We need to support, through our strong principles, articulating democracy and liberty and human rights and free markets, and providing support for those who believe in those ideals. But in terms of boots on the ground, we've had enough in the way of boots on the ground. We can provide assistance, and we can provide other types of support other than boots on the ground. But more importantly, we need to step in with longer-term solutions other than just the military. That's how we're going to win longer term.
This is an interesting week in that the presidential elections held here in the United States, and of course in China we know the CPC is underway. I want to get inside your head because I'm sure you watch the CPC differently than I might or somebody else here in the United States. What do you think about it? What are you seeing? What are you looking for?
Well, I think the lead up to this week has been critically important for the world. And I say that because China is now the second largest economy, one of the largest militaries, a huge emitter of CO2 greenhouse gases, consumer of electricity like never before, It's on the world stage. And so the conversations leading up to this week, I think, have been critically important among the factions within the party. And no doubt many of those conversations have been about who will occupy the top rung of leadership, the standing committee of the Politburo, which will probably see 7 members as opposed to 9, which might make it a little more user-friendly going forward. And I think Xi Jinping will wind up with more allies than Hu Jintao had after the 16th Party Congress in 2002. But I think a lot of the discussions leading up to this moment have been about reform, because the party knows it can't maintain the status quo with too many people who have deep concerns about corruption, lack of reform politically, and even economically. What about the role of the internet longer term in society? Everyone wants to communicate these days. Entrepreneurs want access to the world. They want to create and innovate, but you can't do that if you restrict the free flow of information over the internet, for example. So there are a lot of fundamental discussions that no doubt have been had and will now get an answer in terms of who the people are who populate the Standing Committee and, to a lesser extent, the Politburo, and then how Xi Jinping goes about consolidating his power in the next few months with the party regulars and the PLA and the princelings to some extent. And then he's going to be ready to move, I do believe, probably midpoint next year.
So as he starts moving, look in your crystal ball, where do you see China 5 years from now, 10 years from now?
I see China in a better place 5 years from now. And some of it will be to try to make up for 10 years of very little movement. Let's be honest about it. And I think the leadership knows that they can't afford to drag out the status quo. The people are too restive in China. They need an economy that delivers so that they can be productive on the world stage. I think they want their light to shine as a proud people. And in order to do that, you have to have an economy that supports that. And in order to have an economy that supports that, you're going to have to take a good look at the practices of state-owned enterprises, protection of intellectual property rights, marketing opening measures that are long overdue, and you're going to have to build up a middle class, not just be an export machine. So I think in 5 years, China is less of an export machine, investment-driven, and more of a consumption model, where you've got more innovation, you've got more local industry creation that's driven not by ideas that are taken from others, but homegrown ideas, and firms that are beginning to service and support a growing consumer class who, like never before, are going to want health care, they're going to want financial services, they're going to want to travel and tour the world, they're going to want to access new opportunities that they didn't have this last generation. And as an optimist, I think that opens up a whole new world of economic opportunities for the United States as China begins to rise and reform its economy. And it will, because it has no choice. It simply can't maintain the status quo. And the leadership knows that, and that's going to lead to some interesting years ahead, which I think are by and large going to be productive.
One final question, because I know we're running out of time. Xi Jinping came here to the United States, had a chance to meet the President of the United States. The President isn't shackled, handcuffed by, I've got to run for re-election, I've got to play to a domestic audience. You have really kind of a break here in that sense. You've got the President moving forward in his second term. He's looking at a legacy. You have a new leader in China. How does that relationship come together? And what pointers might you give the President about developing and nurturing that relationship moving forward?
Take the opening. Take the opening, because the U.S.-China relationship goes in very distinct cycles. I can tell you that having lived those cycles, they're very real. There are either elections here, or there are leadership changes there, or you've got Taiwan arms sales, or things that will make China upset or make us upset. We have an opening now that is the first in a long while, and it's going to last, 2, maybe 4 years. And this opening should not be missed. It's for the President and for Xi Jinping to recognize that they've got an open door. No real political constraints that would disrupt the building of a solid relationship based on trust. And it means on our side, we've got to look within our bureaucracy and say, we have a 21st century relationship here. We have an outdated, outmoded level of interaction, bureaucratic machinery. We've got to update it. We need a new Shanghai Communique 2.0, call it. You know, we're still dealing with documents guiding the relationship that are a generation old. We have a huge opening here that is exciting for the United States and exciting for China, and therefore really exciting for the world.
I couldn't help but notice all these great pictures of you and your family, pictures with you and former President Bush, but also right over here on the mantle, you and Hu Jintao. China's important to you, isn't it?
Of course, it is. It has a very deep place in my heart. Right upstairs, you'll find my daughter, who was born in China, Gracie May. So every day I have a reminder that our family is sort of a bridge between the United States and China. But I'm deeply committed to the relationship, not only because I've got great affection for the Chinese people and for the history and traditions of China, but I want to see this relationship succeed, because I know if we succeed, the world's going to be a much better place. It's going to be more peaceful, it's going to be more prosperous, and that will then rely on the goodwill of both sides to make that happen. It's totally doable.
Ambassador Huntsman, thanks so much.
Great to be with you.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you.